In the middle of a live congressional hearing, Pam Bondi muttered, "Go back to Africa," under her breath. She didn't know her mic was on, but what Jasmine Crockett said in response left the entire room speechless and America watching. The studio lights were already too bright when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the set. It was supposed to be a simple debate. 2 panelists, 1 moderator, 3 cameras rolling, and a control room packed with producers who were already sweating through their headsets. But anyone who knew the history between Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi understood this wasn't going to be simple. Pam was already seated when Jasmine arrived. Blonde hair perfectly curled, bright red blazer sharp enough to cut through glass. She glanced at Jasmine once, then went right back to checking her notes, pretending she wasn't rattled. But the way her hands kept fidgeting with her mic said otherwise. Jasmine wore a soft gray suit, no jewelry except a simple watch, no fanfare, no entourage, just her and a battered leather folder tucked under one arm. She greeted the crew with a nod, smiled politely at the moderator, and took her seat without a word. The producers in the control room were buzzing. They'd booked this panel for ratings, sure. 2 women, 2 different Americas, 2 very different ideas of who deserved a seat at the table. And they wanted sparks. They got more than they bargained for. The topic list was standard: immigration, voting rights, public trust in the justice system. Predictable. But everyone knew the real story wasn't the questions. It was the space between them, the tension so thick it could snap. The moderator shuffled his note cards, clearing his throat more than once. Pam flipped through her binder, her smile tight. Jasmine sat still, pen in hand, tapping it once lightly against the edge of the desk, a beat that felt more like a countdown. 5 minutes before airtime, a junior producer whispered, "This could get ugly," into his headset. Another replied, "Yeah. Pray it stays ugly, we can still air." When the red light blinked on, the clock started ticking, not just on the segment, on something bigger, something no one in that room was ready to face. Not really. And the first crack in the surface came faster than anyone thought it would. It started polite. Tight smiles, rehearsed sound bites, 2 women talking past each other while pretending to engage. Pam Bondi leaned into her opening remarks like she was at a campaign rally, hitting immigration with buzzwords like border crisis, American values, and law and order. Jasmine listened, blinking slowly, waiting her turn. When the moderator tossed her the first question, Jasmine responded in her usual way. Calm, measured, no extra weight on her words. She talked about human dignity, about broken systems, about the difference between enforcing laws and erasing humanity. Pam didn't like that. You could see it in the way her smile tightened, in the way she started interrupting. First small, a muttered, "That's not true," under her breath. Then louder, jumping in before Jasmine finished a full sentence. The moderator tried to steer it back. Pam pushed harder, words overlapping, cutting off answers, inserting jabs that weren't even thinly veiled anymore. At one point she laughed, short, fake, bitter, and said, "You always make it about feelings instead of facts." Jasmine didn't take the bait. She kept speaking, slower now, like refusing to be rushed was its own act of defiance. Pam's fingers drummed against the desk. Her foot tapped under the table. The camera caught it all. Then the question came about immigration reform and American identity. Jasmine answered first, grounding it in history, in policies that had built walls while claiming to build bridges. Pam leaned in, cutting her off mid-sentence, her voice sharp enough to slice the air between them. And then she said it. "Maybe you should just go back to Africa." The words hit the studio like a bomb. You could hear the sound die in people's throats. The moderator froze, eyes wide, mouth half open. The producers in the control room stopped breathing. Pam sat back like she'd just dropped a mic, like she thought she'd scored some kind of point, but what she'd really done was set fire to whatever illusion of civility the segment had left. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't flinch. She just stared at Pam, a stare that held the weight of every woman who's ever been told they don't belong. The silence after was louder than any insult, and it was only the beginning. The words didn't just land, they splintered, ripped through the studio like a stone through glass. For a full 2 seconds, the kind of seconds that feel like forever, nobody moved. Not the moderator, who looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Not the producers behind the cameras, who stared at their monitors, wide-eyed, helpless. Not even the makeup artist hovering just off stage, frozen mid-step, a brush still in her hand. Pam Bondi sat back in her chair, arms crossed, lips twitching, with something that wasn't quite a smile. More like satisfaction, like she thought she had won something. The moderator opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted toward the control room, as if someone there could hand him a script fast enough to fix what just happened. They couldn't. There was no playbook for this moment. And Jasmine Crockett, she sat there, completely still. The same pen still resting between her fingers. No flash of anger, no raised voice, no flurry of words to fill the air, just the kind of calm that comes when you've seen it all before. She looked at Pam, not furious, not even surprised, just a quiet, razor-edged disbelief. The cameras kept rolling, every beat of silence captured in crystal-clear high definition, every shift of body language, every unspoken word hanging between them. Someone offstage coughed, sharp and awkward. A producer's voice cracked over the earpiece, "Should we cut?" Another snapped back, "No. Stay live. Stay on her." Because somehow everyone understood. This moment wasn't about Pam anymore. It was about what Jasmine Crockett was going to do next. And when she finally moved, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't explosive. It was deliberate, like someone choosing the sharpest arrow from a quiver full of them. Jasmine reached for her microphone with the same calmness as someone straightening a tablecloth before a meal. Not rushed, not rattled, just precise. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't check with the moderator. She didn't look around the room for permission. She simply leaned in, microphone in hand, and said it. Low even, clear enough to slice through every corner of the studio. "My ancestors built this country," she said, her voice steady as a heartbeat, "while yours were writing laws to keep them enslaved. No anger, no raised voice, no theatrics. Just truth, delivered so cleanly that it didn't need an echo. The words didn't crash into the room. They settled, like dust after a collapse. Slow, heavy, permanent." Pam's smirk faltered. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to answer, wanted to claw her way out. But there was no room left to move. The moderator blinked hard, gripping his note cards so tightly they bent at the edges. The control room fell into a stunned, reverent silence. No one dared call for a cut now, because they knew they were witnessing something that wasn't just TV. It was history being made, one sentence at a time. Jasmine didn't follow it up with more words. She didn't need to. She sat back, microphone still in hand, and looked at Pam with a patience that could have set the building on fire without striking a single match. Across America, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens without realizing it. Some with their mouths open, some with their fists clenched, some with tears stinging at the backs of their eyes, because what Jasmine said wasn't just a response, it was a reclamation of space, of dignity, of truth, and it was only just beginning. The moderator tried. He shuffled his cards, cleared his throat, forced a tight, shaky smile onto his face. "Well," he said, voice cracking slightly, "let's move the conversation forward." But the conversation had already moved. It had crossed a line there was no walking back. Pam Bondi shifted in her seat, her face a tight mask of something between anger and panic. She laughed, a high, brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "That's a pretty strong accusation, Congresswoman," she said, voice dripping fake politeness. "Maybe you should check your history before throwing stones." But it was too late, too desperate, and everyone watching could feel it. Pam kept talking, words tumbling over each other, trying to spin, to claw her way out. Claiming misinterpretations, miscommunications, even trying to reframe her insult as a joke. The more she spoke, the smaller her words became. The audience wasn't buying it. Neither was Jasmine. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes or raise her voice. She just sat there, letting the weight of her sentence hang between them, letting the silence work like gravity, pulling the truth out into the open. Every second Pam flailed, Jasmine grew stronger, without moving a muscle. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is nothing at all. The moderator glanced helplessly toward the control booth, his fingers drumming nervously against the table. The producers didn't cut to commercial. They didn't dare. Because even though the moment had shattered the schedule, it had also cracked something bigger, something real. Pam finally went quiet. Not because she was finished, but because she realized no one was reaching out a lifeline. Not the moderator, not the network, not even the audience at home, and Jasmine, with all the calm of someone who had long outgrown the need for validation, simply folded her hands on the desk and waited. The debate was technically still happening, but everybody knew. The real conversation had already left the building. The clip hit Twitter before the segment even ended. A shaky screen recording at first, someone in the control room leaking it through the back door. By the time the credits rolled, it was everywhere. Jasmine Crockett, sitting still. Pam Bondi, unraveling. One sentence, no shouting, no chaos, just precision. The hashtags ignited like dry brush catching flame. Jasmine Crockett is America. Bondi exposed, built not bought. By noon, Jasmine's name was trending in 3 countries. By 2 p.m., clips were stitched into TikTok edits with solemn piano music, voiceovers reading her words like scripture. Instagram feeds filled with stills of Jasmine sitting calm, her gaze steady, captioned only with single words: powerful, grace, unshaken. Celebrities chimed in. Kerry Washington reposted the clip with 3 words: read her right. Ava DuVernay wrote, "When they go low, Jasmine goes lower, to the roots where the truth lives." LeBron James tweeted, "Built this country, period, respect." Even politicians, ones who usually played it safe, weighed in. A few quietly liked posts. Others issued formal statements about respect in public discourse. Some didn't say anything at all, but their silence said enough. And everyday people, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, students, filled the comment sections with stories of being told to go back somewhere. With the pain that comes from hearing you don't belong in the place your ancestors helped build. Pam Bondi's camp scrambled to push back. They leaked a half apology to a friendly outlet, claiming she'd been misunderstood. It didn't work. The internet wasn't confused, it was furious. One clip in particular kept surfacing. Jasmine lifting the mic with deliberate care. Jasmine saying it clearly, simply, "My ancestors built this country while yours were writing laws to keep them enslaved." And every time it replayed, it hit harder. Not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. By sunset, it was clear. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a cultural reset. And Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a congresswoman. She had become something rarer, a mirror. One a lot of people suddenly weren't ready to look into, and one a lot more were ready to defend. It took 3 days for Pam Bondi to say anything. 3 days of headlines, 3 days of trending hashtags, 3 days of silence that only made the wound louder. When the statement finally came, it wasn't live. It wasn't brave. It wasn't even particularly well written. Just a tight 2-paragraph note emailed to a handful of newsrooms and posted at the bottom of her social media page. She blamed emotions running high. She said her comments were misinterpreted. She insisted she had never intended to cause offense. It wasn't an apology. It was damage control dressed up in tired cliches. Critics tore it apart within minutes. Civil rights leaders called it hollow. Journalists called it cowardly. Even some of her usual allies in the media quietly admitted off the record it wasn't enough. Because the country hadn't misinterpreted her words. They'd heard them, loud and clear, and no amount of PR spin could drown them out. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett didn't issue a counter-statement. She didn't go on a media blitz. She didn't even tweet about it. She stayed silent, and somehow, that silence hit harder than any rebuttal could have. Because Jasmine knew something Pam didn't. When you're right, you don't have to perform. You don't have to dance for the cameras or take victory laps. You let the truth settle where it falls. Every major network invited Jasmine to respond directly. Morning shows, cable panels, late-night interviews. She turned down almost all of them. Not because she was scared, because she understood. The moment wasn't about scoring points against Pam Bondi. It was about something bigger, something that couldn't be measured in retweets or headlines, something that deserved more than a soundbite. And when Jasmine finally did speak, really speak, she didn't use Bondi's name at all. She used the moment to build something stronger, something Bondi could never tear down. It aired on a Sunday night. No big fanfare, no network primetime slots, just a single 15-minute segment broadcast live from a small community center in Dallas. Jasmine Crockett stood behind a wooden podium. No teleprompter, no applause track, just her voice, clear and steady, filling the space. She wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry and no slogans, no armor, but her words. "I wasn't surprised," she said, speaking directly to the camera, "because when you live in a country built by your hands but still questioned at every door, nothing surprises you." The audience inside, small, tight-knit, a few dozen folding chairs, leaned in. But Jasmine wasn't speaking just to them. She was speaking to every living room, every dorm room, every hospital break room where people were watching, waiting, hoping she would say something they hadn't even realized they needed to hear. "I belong here," Jasmine said, her voice tightening just slightly around the edges. "My parents belonged here, my grandparents, my ancestors who built railroads and tilled stolen land and marched through blood-soaked streets. They belonged here." She paused, letting the words breathe, letting them sink deep. "And so do you," she added. "Every child who's ever been told to go back to a place they've never seen. Every student who's ever been asked where they're really from. Every working mother who's had to prove she deserves her own country, her own voice." She didn't name Bondi. She didn't have to. The insult had already been swallowed up by the truth. "This is our country too," Jasmine said, "and we don't have to apologize for existing in it." Her tone never rose. She didn't need volume. She had gravity. "For the young black girls watching," she said, voice softening now, "I want you to know. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into rooms you already built. You don't have to trade your dignity for entry. You belong here, and you always have." The final words weren't shouted. They were offered, like a hand extended through the screen. "Stand tall," Jasmine said, smiling now, "and let them adjust." The feed cut out without fanfare. No theme music, no pundit analysis, just silence. The kind that stays with you long after the TV shuts off. At first, the headlines were about the insult, the words that rattled the air, the moment that made everyone stop mid-scroll. But within a week, something bigger started to happen. The coverage shifted. Not just about what was said, but about why it landed so heavily. Think pieces flooded the internet. The Atlantic ran a headline: "Coded racism isn't new, but Jasmine Crockett's response is." The New York Times called it a case study in political courage. Law professors started assigning the clip to their students. Community organizers printed Jasmine's words on posters and protest signs. People started talking, really talking, about respectability politics, about how for generations Black Americans, especially women, had been expected to perform calmness, obedience, and grace just to be heard, about how insults weren't always shouted. Sometimes they wore a smile and shook your hand. Cable news anchors, who rarely strayed from their scripts, started asking bigger questions. Where does the expectation for decorum end and the demand for silence begin? Whose anger gets excused and whose strength gets punished? Why was it that a calm, factual response could shake a nation more than 1,000 viral speeches? Jasmine's name didn't just stay in the headlines, it changed why people were saying it. Not as a footnote, not as a trending moment, but as a symbol, a shorthand for the kind of poise that doesn't need volume to carry weight. A reminder that dignity isn't passive, it's radical. In classrooms, town halls, activist group chats, Jasmine Crockett became the example, not for clapping back, but for standing still while the storm broke around her and never letting it touch her center. Weeks passed. The internet moved on like it always does. New controversies, new headlines, new viral moments. But not this time, not fully. Because Jasmine's moment didn't get lost in the noise. It became a touchstone. It started appearing in places you wouldn't expect. In college syllabi under sections on modern civil rights movements. In keynote speeches at leadership conferences. In quiet conversations between mothers and daughters, between mentors and their protégés. It wasn't the insult people remembered, it was the way Jasmine answered it, calm, precise, unapologetic. She hadn't defended herself with anger, she hadn't fought fire with fire. She had refused to let ignorance set the terms of the conversation, and in doing so, she redefined what standing your ground looks like. It wasn't about shouting louder. It wasn't about trading insult for insult. It was about refusing to give away your power, even when someone is daring you to, especially when they are. Somewhere on a campus bulletin board, a student posted a screenshot of Jasmine's face from that day. Below it, handwritten in sharp black marker, "Sometimes you don't defeat ignorance by matching its volume. You defeat it by refusing to let it write your story." In the years that followed, Jasmine Crockett's moment lived on, not as a viral clip, not as a headline, but as a blueprint, a reminder that you don't have to shout to be heard, you don't have to bend to be seen, and you never, ever have to shrink to fit inside someone else's small vision of who you're supposed to be. You just have to stand and let the truth do the rest. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.